And another thing to keep in mind is both tables and frames are very difficult to get to work properly on the mobile platform. And the reason is tables and frames both push things out horizontally. A typical frame-based site will end up having a nav bar on the left and your content on the right. And oftentimes the nav bar will be at least 200 pixels wide. So if you're talking about having at least 200 pixels taken up just for the nav bar, and you're dealing with something like the iPhone, you're basically giving yourself 160 pixels for the content, which is far too narrow. So frames, not a good idea for mobile development. Tables can work in some circumstances, but you definitely don't want to have large content in the tables. If you really have table-based data that you want to display, you might want to consider reformatting it to some kind of list or something else. And we have experience with that. We can give you some ideas on how to do that. All right, so EPUB and Kindle. These are two competing formats for basically the same kind of output. The Kindle format is actually a format called Mobi. It was originally created by Mobi Pocket, and then it was adopted by Kindle. At this point, the only real reason to be using it is because of the Kindle. The Kindle is, to my knowledge, it's the most popular dedicated e-reader device as a single unit. But compared to all the other e-readers out there, it has a smaller market share. And definitely when you start taking into account all of the tablets that provide EPUB support, it's definitely in the minority. EPUB is the better format. EPUB provides you more styling abilities. EPUB has more CSS support. You can definitely customize your EPUBs much closer to your actual format. Kindle or Mobi format lacks some basic support for even changing colors and borders, or even can be very difficult to change on a Kindle device. So in general, you're going to get better results with your EPUB. Another nice advantage, though, is that there are tools out there right now. In particular, there's an open source tool called Calibre, which can automatically convert between the two formats. So the demos that we'll show you today with Cisco, what we actually do is we've just created an EPUB output format from the DOT, and then Calibre is able to automatically convert that to a Kindle. Results are not perfect, but in most cases they're very good. Usually you can just make some minor modifications to your EPUB content, and then it'll come through even better. So here's an example of some Kindle content. You can see that you get to have the talk. Everything is clickable. So you can go ahead, people can, your users will be able to look at the table of contents, click on a link, and go directly to the content that they're looking for. The content is similar to a web page. The content will reflow to fit the screen. So if you've ever been looking at a web page and then made the page a little bit smaller, you'll notice that the text in the paragraphs will reflow to fit. If you do that with a PDF, you won't get the same results. Either the PDF, depending on the application, either the entire page will scale down, making the font smaller, or you'll need to do some horizontal scrolling in order to see what's on the side. In the case of Kindle, and EPUB for that matter, that's not the case. We have the search window open on the right-hand side now. You'll see that since there's less space available, the paragraph simply got narrower. So this automatic solves the problem that we've been discussing before of horizontal scrolling. Kindle, what you're looking at now is Kindle for PC. There is also, you basically get the exact same result when you have a Kindle device. We just can't show you over the webinar a Kindle device directly. You'll notice that the styling is pretty simplistic as well. That's part of Kindle. You can compare that with what we have in the EPUB realm. So what you're looking at right now is a program called Adobe Digital Editions. This is probably the most common EPUB viewer for PC. Every operating system has a different EPUB reader, some kind of EPUB reader. Calibre, the tool that I mentioned before that can do conversions, also provides a cross-platform open source viewer for EPUBs. One of the downsides of having so many different EPUB readers is that there are cross-platform issues. This is similar to what exists in web browsers, that different web browsers have different support. But since EPUB readers are less developed at this point in time, they're less mature, the differences are even greater. And we'll see some examples of that later on. You can see here that we are able to get tables to appear, and they appear correctly, but there's also not a huge amount of content in the tables. That's why it's able to look okay in this output format. Now, so let's talk about a bit about the internals of EPUB. EPUB is built off of XHTML1, which is the XML version of HTML4. HTML4 was the standard approach for HTML for about 10 years on the web. A few years ago that HTML5 came on the scene. HTML5 introduces a few new semantic elements along with a number of other advantages, but for our purposes, what we're missing is these semantic elements like section or navs. So those are things that are very convenient and very good to use when doing HTML output for mobile devices. You don't have those available when you're dealing with an EPUB. Let's cover some of the nuances with different EPUB readers. iBooks has a number of different bugs. iBooks is the EPUB reader provided by Apple for the iPad and iPhone. iBooks actually has a number of different bugs associated with it. For example, one that's bit us in the past is if you have an image inside a block element, such as a paragraph, inside a table, the image just disappears. So you can actually have content that disappears. There are workarounds to try to get this to work, but that's a known bug in iBooks that has not been addressed. Aldeico is a common EPUB reader for the Android. This isn't a bug, but by default, they turn off user styles. So user styles means the CSS. So by default, if your user downloads your EPUB on their Android and they haven't made any changes to Aldeico, you're going to see an unstyled bit of content. So if you've set different colors, if you've set different fonts, those won't flow through. And then Stanza is another EPUB reader. It insists on centering headings unless you're very assertive with it. You have to go ahead and put in a bunch of special markup in order to get it to left align your headings. So as you can see, there are definitely nuances to each of these formats. The best practice in order to get this all to work correctly is start off with good HTML. You want HTML that looks correct without any CSS. And I'll give you an example of the bad way of doing things. You have a page that has a few headings. You mark up your headings with what are called div tags, which are non-semantic elements, and you give them different classes, class of heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3, and then you use CSS to give them different sizes. That's a bad approach for EPUB, because if you open this up in Aldeico, you're going to end up with unstyled content. The headings will look exactly the same as the rest of the body text. So instead, you should be using H1, H2, H3 in order to properly denote the headings. And then you can use CSS to make modifications on top of that. This approach is what we call progressive enhancement. Progressive enhancement is you use CSS to make things better, but not to make things work. So everything works without the CSS, but if you want to add a little more style, you can do so. On the desktop, people are doing this much more often for what are called CSS animations and transitions, to get text shadows and drop shadows. Most of those features aren't available in any EPUB reader right now, but you can do, some EPUB readers do support rounded corners, gradients. You can start using those. Even some more basic features, just changing border colors, are not fully supported in all EPUB readers. But if you put it in your CSS, supportive EPUB readers will add those features, and non-supportive ones will simply ignore it. So you're definitely safe by adding in extra CSS. You just have to keep in mind that the result may be not pixel perfect between every device. In fact, odds are there will be differences. So as long as you're okay with having differences in your output, this is a great approach to take.